In this video, I will be showing you how to install the leading edge machining aluminum dog carrier into your 110 Summit. Some awesome things about this product is that it's made out of aluminum. It helps the differentials lock up. And the vehicle won't roll back and forth in neutral. So without further ado, let's get this crawler must-have installed in the vehicle. The first step is getting all these motor wires unplugged. Also take off this gear shifter piece with a pair of pliers. Then you're going to flip the truck over. Then you're going to undo the center skid plate, which is held in with 9 screws. Then remove the grub screws on both the center drive lines. Then pull back the rear drive shaft and undo these 4 screws that hold in the transmission. Now that we have the transmission out, we don't need the vehicle on the table anymore. There's 2 screws to take off the motor. One for the gear cover and the other one for the motor. To take off the slipper clutch and spur gear, there's 1 nut. To take apart the transmission, you undo these 6 screws on the back. When you're taking apart this transmission, try not to use too much force. Although some may be necessary. All the parts of the transmission should be taken apart except for this one gear, this one idler gear, which is held down with these 2 screws and some bearings in behind that. Other than that, you want to have these 2 gearbox halves with 3 bearings on each side, this shaft, these 2 gears which go together, the DogBone carrier shaft, this piece, the DogBone carrier gears, a little plastic shim, just one of them, and the DogBone carrier which we will be replacing. When you're putting the transmission together, it's important to know how the gears shift. So right here you have the DogBone carrier shaft, the 2 DogBone gears, and the DogBone carrier. This gear, this piece, will shift back and forth on this shaft. See? Back and forth. Okay? And then there's little grooves inside of the DogBone gears, which these grooves, these notches, fit into. So we'll slide these on. Inside the transmission, there's this little piece that slides up and down, well, side to side, I should say. And that's how this DogBone carrier moves. And, of course, this is controlled by a servo. But anyway, it'll make this piece slide back and forth, so one of these gears is going to be engaged at all times. And then whichever gear this corresponds to depicts the gear ratio that's existing. And that's how you have a 2-speed transmission that goes together. So now we're going to start putting this back together. Before we put everything together, we want to make sure that this shifting mechanism works. So we're going to take some white lithium grease. So we're just going to spray a little bit inside the DogBone carrier. That was a little bit too much, but we'll put it inside the grooves. And then a tiny bit on the shaft as well. That went everywhere. Well, we're just going to coat that sucker up and then slide the DogBone carrier onto the shaft. Alright, it seems to be moving back and forth properly. Then we're going to make sure that these grooves are facing in towards the DogBone carrier when we put these gears on. Now we're going to put it inside the transmission, but we need to take off one end of the gear, slide the shaft out, and we're going to lift up this plastic piece and stick this one gear inside. And it's okay if you bend the plastic a little bit, it shouldn't break. Now that we have that gear in place, we're going to take the DogBone, slide it onto the shifter, and then push it down, slide the shaft in, make sure it goes into the grooves, and through the other side, which it does, And then we put this other gear on with this little plastic shim on the end. We're going to put the two halves together, close it up, and then test the shifting. Make sure that everything is working well. Close these pieces together, and now you should have this able to shift back and forth very smoothly. If it works smoothly, then you're going to take it apart and put the rest of the pieces in. We need to start off by taking out all the things we put into it before. Alright, and then now we're going to start with this piece. Goes into the center on this half. We're going to take this shaft and stick it into here. And then now we can put all the old items back into place. So this gear, the dog bone, push it down, the shaft, the other dog bone gear, and the shim on the end. Now we're going to put the other gearbox half onto all of it. Make sure all these shafts are into place. See, that one isn't perfectly aligned. Gotta move it around until it pops in. There we go. And just push them together. With the transmission in one piece, we're going to put back on those 6 screws. Now it's time to put back on the slipper clutch. We're going to start with this little bar, which goes inside that hole. Make sure it's even and make sure it's upright so it doesn't fall out. You're going to take this plate and line it up with the bar and push it all the way down. And make sure you don't lose a little bar. Should click into place. Then we're going to get this plate, and you want the shiny side to be facing outwards and then the bland side to be facing inwards, and you put those little grooves into place. Hold that there, slide on the spur gear and slipper and the spring and the nut, which you will tighten down. To help with tightening it down, you can put a 2mm screwdriver on the other side to hold that in place. And then now you can just tighten this all the way down. Once you have it all the way down, you're going to loosen it about 1/4 of a turn. Getting the transmission back on the chassis is a pain in the ass at first, so you're going to have to take off a few other things. We'll start off with these 2 screws that hold on the skid plate. Then you're going to undo the turnbuckles by sliding your screwdriver in between here and taking out that screw on both sides. Now the links to the servo saver. Pull off the servo saver and then undo these 2 screws that hold on this brace. And then you're going to undo this grub screw for the center drive shaft. You can pull off the front center drive shaft. Alright, so the transmission is pretty hard to mount into the chassis, but doing this is going to be a lot easier because you have a lot more room. So you're going to move all these wires out of the way and then try and slide up this transmission all the way to the top. Now you're going to pull it back a little bit and slide this front drive shaft onto the dog bone shaft that's sticking out. Bring it back down a little bit and then slide the other front center drive shaft onto the differential. Then you're going to put in those 2 screws here, the grub screws, and also slide this drive shaft on. I hit it. Put back on the servo saver brace with these 2 screws. Slide in the servo saver, and you're going to reattach the turnbuckles to the servo saver with these flat-headed screws. Then you're going to reattach these links to the servo saver. And then you're going to slide back in the skid plate and put back in these 2 screws, but not this one yet, when you still need to put back in the center skid plate. Now moving back onto the transmission, we're going to reinstall these 4 screws to hold the transmission in place. You're going to reinstall the center skid plate by lifting up the front lip, sliding it into place, and then putting back in these 9 screws. Now you're going to flip the vehicle back over, slide the motor onto this peg, then tighten down the screw with this correct gear mesh, then put back on this gear cover held on with 1 screw. Reattach the shifting servo and plug back in the motor wires. And now your vehicle is all back together and ready to drive. If you have any questions or feedback for this video, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will talk to you later.